I never thought I'd be the kind of person telling a story like this. The kind that sounds made up, the kind that people listen to and immediately assume you're exaggerating or looking for attention. But I'm telling this anyway because it happened, and I need someone to know. I need to warn people. What happened to me at a McDonald's on a random Wednesday night changed everything about how I see the world, how I move through it, and how I'll never feel completely safe again. It started simply. I was working a double shift at the hospital where I'm a nurse. 12 hours of dealing with patients, emergencies, the constant demands of the job. By 11 p.m., I was exhausted but still wired. That anxious tired where you can't sleep even though your body aches. There's a McDonald's about 10 minutes from the hospital on Henderson Boulevard. I'd been there maybe twice before. Nothing memorable about it. Just a typical McDonald's with the usual setup, the usual fluorescent lighting, the usual smell of fries and beef. I pulled into the drive-thru around 11:30 p.m. I wasn't even that hungry. I just needed something to do, something to occupy the time before I could go home and crash. I ordered a quarter pounder with cheese, medium fries, and a Sprite. Standard order. The drive-thru was empty, which made sense for that time of night. I pulled up to the window and that's when I noticed the employee handing over the order looked uncomfortable. Not tired, uncomfortable. Her eyes kept darting to something behind me, toward the interior of the restaurant. I asked if everything was okay and she just shook her head slightly and said the total without meeting my gaze again. I paid, and took my bag and began pulling forward. That's when I heard it. Glass breaking, not a small sound, a substantial crack of a window shattering. My instinct was to look back in my rearview mirror, and that's when I saw him. A man in the parking lot, moving quickly but deliberately toward the back of the building. He wasn't running. He was walking with purpose, like he knew exactly where he was going. He wore dark clothes and his face was obscured by the shadows in the angle. But what struck me most was how calm he seemed, like he belonged there, like he'd done this before. I should have driven away immediately. I should have called the police right then. But instead I sat there, frozen, watching him disappear around the corner of the building. My phone was in my hand before I even realized I decided to call. When I dialed 911 and reported what I'd seen, the dispatcher asked for my location and details. She said officers would be sent, but they were currently responding to another call. It might take 15 minutes. She asked if I felt safe staying in my vehicle. I said yes, but I wasn't sure that was true. While I waited, I opened my food bag. There was something else in there besides the burger and fries. An envelope. Plain white, no markings on the outside. My hand started shaking. I didn't open it. I just stared at it, sitting there among the fries like it belonged there, like it had been placed there intentionally. I looked back at the McDonald's entrance, and that's when I saw the employee, the same girl who had taken my payment, standing in the doorway. She was looking right at me, not at the parking lot, not around at the chaos, at me, directly at me. And her expression wasn't fear, it was something else. Recognition maybe, or warning. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. 2 officers, both taking it seriously. They checked the perimeter of the building, looked at the broken window, spoke to the manager inside. When they came back to my car, they said nothing had been taken, no registers tampered with, no inventory missing. The manager thought maybe it was kids, maybe vandalism, but couldn't say for certain. They asked if I'd seen the person clearly enough to describe them. I said no, not really. Just a man, dark clothes, that was all. They asked if I'd been in the building. I said no, I'd used the drive-thru. One of the officers asked if anything unusual had happened at the drive-thru window. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell him about the envelope, but something stopped me. The way the employee had looked at me, the way she seemed to be warning me with her eyes not to say anything. I told the officers nothing unusual had happened. They filled out a report, said they'd increase patrols in the area, and left. I drove home with the envelope still in my car. I didn't open it until I was inside my apartment with all the doors locked and the blinds drawn. Inside was a single sentence written in blue ink. Stop working third shift. That was all. No signature, no explanation. Just those 5 words telling me to stop working the overnight nursing shift at the hospital. I didn't sleep that night. I kept reading the note over and over, trying to understand what it meant. Who wrote it? Why did they care what shift I worked? How did they know I worked third shift? I'd never been to that McDonald's before. No one there would know anything about my job unless they'd been watching me, unless they'd done research on me. The next day I called in sick to the hospital. I couldn't face going in. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, that someone knew my schedule and was trying to control it. I spent the entire day looking at my curtains, checking my locks, reviewing my routines in my head. Who had access to information about my work schedule? Co-workers, my supervisor, people at the hospital. But how would anyone from the McDonald's know that? Over the following week, strange things kept happening. I found a note slipped under my apartment door. It just said, "We're watching." I reported it to the police and they took a report, but said it could be anyone. A prank, a neighbor. Then I got a text from an unknown number. "You didn't listen." I changed my number. I started taking personal days from work. I stopped going out at night, but the messages continued on my new number. How did they get it? How were they staying ahead of me? I eventually did change my shift. I requested days only. I told my supervisor I was having health issues. It seemed like the safest option, but changing my shift didn't make the messages stop. They just changed. "Good choice," one text said, "but we're still watching." Another, "You can't hide." Each one made my stomach turn. Each one made me feel smaller and less in control of my own life. I've thought about moving. I've thought about leaving my job entirely. I've thought about trying to go back to that McDonald's to figure out who did this. But that thought terrifies me more than anything else. What if I went back and they were there? What if they were waiting for me? Part of me believes they would be. Part of me knows that by changing my shift, I've only encouraged them. I've shown them that I respond to their messages, that I'm obedient, that I can be controlled. That's the thing no one tells you about this kind of horror. It's not the physical threat that breaks you, it's the loss of control. It's someone else deciding who you are and what you do, and you have no choice but to comply because the alternative is not knowing what they'll do next. I've replayed that night at the McDonald's 1,000 times. I've wondered if I should have stayed, if I should have gotten the employee's name, if I should have opened the envelope at the window instead of in my car. But none of that matters now. What matters is that somewhere out there, someone has decided I'm worth their attention. They know my schedule. They know where I work. They know where I live. And they've made it clear that they're capable of finding me anywhere. I haven't been back to that McDonald's. I never will. And I'll never feel safe getting food from a drive-thru again without wondering if someone has written a message for me in the bag. If you ever find yourself in a McDonald's and something feels off, trust that feeling. Don't ignore the employee who seems afraid. Don't brush off the unusual presence in the parking lot. Don't open anything that shouldn't be in your order without thinking about what it means. Because once you're noticed by someone with bad intentions, once you're chosen for reasons you'll never understand, your life becomes about managing their obsession instead of living your own life. I'm telling this story because I'm terrified, because I'm still getting messages from unknown numbers, because every time my phone buzzes, my heart races, because I don't know if this will ever end, and because I need people to understand that horror doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives at a drive-thru window at 11:30 p.m. on a Wednesday night. Sometimes it comes in a bag with your fries. Sometimes it changes your entire existence in the time it takes to place an order. Stay aware. Stay alert. And please, if you see something unusual at a McDonald's, say something. Because you could be saving someone from becoming like me. Someone who'll never feel safe again. Someone who's looking over their shoulder constantly. Someone whose life was fundamentally altered by a stranger with a message and an agenda I still can't comprehend. This is my warning. This is my story. And I hope it's enough to make someone else think twice before dismissing the unusual as nothing. I'm a college student, and I have this routine. Every Thursday night, after my late class ends at 9 p.m., I stop at the McDonald's on University Drive. It's my little tradition. Same order every time. A Big Mac, a large Coke, and a McFlurry. The drive-thru is usually busy on Thursday nights with other students, but it's quick and it's reliable. I've been doing this for almost an entire semester without anything unusual happening. Then one Thursday in October, something changed. I pulled up to the drive-thru window and instead of the usual cheerful employee, there was a man I'd never seen before working the window. He was older, maybe late 40s, with a strange intensity in his eyes. He didn't ask me what I wanted to order. He just said, "Big Mac, large Coke, McFlurry, right?" I froze. I hadn't said anything yet. How did he know my order? I laughed it off nervously and said, "Yeah, that's what I wanted." He smiled, but it wasn't a normal smile. It was tight, controlled, like he was showing me his teeth rather than actually smiling. When I pulled up to the window to pay, he handed me my bag and leaned out slightly. He said, "See you next week." Not in a friendly way, in a way that felt like a promise, like a threat. I didn't respond. I just drove away trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe word had gotten around among the employees about regular customers. Maybe he'd just seen me before and I hadn't noticed. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The following Thursday, I almost didn't go. I sat in my apartment for 20 minutes, debating with myself. It's just a McDonald's. It's just an employee. What's the worst that could happen? I decided I was being paranoid and drove to the drive-thru anyway. Different employee at the window this time, a young girl who seemed normal. But when she handed me my bag, she leaned in close and whispered, "He's waiting for you inside." My stomach dropped. I asked her what she meant, and she just shook her head and looked away. I drove off without asking anything else. I didn't go back to that McDonald's for 3 weeks. I went to a different location on the other side of town, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a mistake by not going back. Like I'd somehow offended someone by breaking the routine. One night, I got a text from an unknown number. It just said, "We miss you on Thursdays." I didn't respond. I blocked the number, but then a different unknown number texted the next day. "You broke the pattern. That wasn't nice." I started changing my routine completely. I stopped getting McDonald's altogether. I changed my schedule. I drove different routes home, but the texts kept coming from different numbers. They knew things about me. They mentioned my first name. They mentioned my apartment building. One message said, "Your class ends at 9 p.m. Why aren't you coming anymore?" How did they know my class schedule? How much had they learned about me? I reported everything to the police, and they tried to trace the numbers, but they were all burner phones, impossible to track. A detective told me to avoid the McDonald's completely and to be aware of my surroundings, but the messages stopped after about 2 weeks, and that somehow felt worse than when they were coming constantly, because the silence meant they were still watching, still planning, just not communicating anymore. I never went back to that McDonald's on University Drive. I don't eat at any McDonald's alone anymore, and I changed my entire weekly routine because I realized that routines make you predictable, and being predictable makes you vulnerable to people who are paying attention. The worst part is wondering if that man is still working there on Thursday nights, waiting for someone to develop a pattern, waiting to learn their schedule, waiting to make them feel like they belong to someone else's plan. If you have a routine, any routine, try to break it up. Don't let yourself become predictable, because there are people out there who notice patterns, who watch people, who decide that someone's regular Thursday night visit is interesting enough to become part of their own routine. And once they're part of your life, once they know your schedule better than you do, you can't just take it back. You can only run from it. I work in tech, and I'm usually glued to my phone and laptop. I barely have time to eat most days. But one Friday afternoon, I decided to take a real break. I actually left my desk, walked to the McDonald's 3 blocks from my office, and decided to sit inside instead of just grabbing something and leaving. I was going to be present, enjoy my meal, maybe read something that wasn't work-related for once. I ordered a McChicken sandwich, fries, and an iced tea. And I sat in a booth by the window where I could people watch. The place was moderately busy with the lunch crowd, mostly office workers like me. Nothing felt out of the ordinary. I was eating, minding my own business, when I noticed something. The woman at the table across from me kept looking at my food. Not in a casual, glancing way. She was staring at my sandwich like it held important information. I tried ignoring her, but it became increasingly obvious that she was studying what I was eating. I felt uncomfortable but didn't want to be rude, so I just tried to eat faster and leave. But as I was finishing up, she got up from her table and came directly to mine. She sat down across from me without asking permission and said, "That's not your order?" I told her it was. I'd ordered it myself. She shook her head and said, "No. Nash, you ordered a McChicken. But that's not the one you're supposed to get. The one you're supposed to get is being prepared. The manager knows. I was completely confused and honestly a little frightened. I told her I didn't understand and asked who she was. She didn't answer. She just stood up and walked toward the counter, then disappeared into the back. I sat there for a moment, completely disoriented, and then decided to leave. As I was getting up, the manager came out and called my name. He asked if I'd finished my meal and I said yes. He seemed relieved and told me that there had been a mix-up with the order system. He said the woman who had approached me was just a customer, but she had worked at McDonald's before, and sometimes she tried to help when she thought there was confusion. That explanation made no sense to me. How would a previous employee know about my order being mixed up? How would she know I was supposed to get a different sandwich? I asked the manager and he looked uncomfortable. He said he'd look into it, but he didn't seem convinced of his own explanation. I left and walked back to my office feeling deeply unsettled. The following Monday, I got a call from an unknown number. The person on the other end was a woman, and she said, "You got the wrong sandwich on Friday. You were never supposed to have it." I asked who this was, and she hung up. I called the number back, but it went to a disconnected line. I blocked it just in case. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What did she mean I was never supposed to have it? It's just food, just a sandwich from McDonald's. Over the next week, I got 3 more calls from different numbers, all women, all saying variations of the same thing. "You got the wrong order. The sandwich wasn't for you. You took something that didn't belong to you." I filed a report with the police, but without more concrete threats. They said there wasn't much they could do. One officer suggested it might be some kind of elaborate prank or harassment from someone at work. I became obsessed with understanding what it meant. I went back to the McDonald's and asked about the woman who had approached me. The manager didn't remember her name and said she came in sometimes but wasn't a regular. He agreed to look at security footage from that day, but said it would take time. He never called me back. What haunts me most is that I still don't know what the mix-up was supposed to be. Was there a different sandwich meant for me that I never received? Was there something in the sandwich I got that shouldn't have been there? Why would multiple people care so much about which sandwich I received that day? I've stopped eating at that McDonald's. I've stopped eating at most McDonald's, actually. Because now every time I order something, I wonder if it's actually for me. I wonder if I'm taking something that belongs to someone else. I wonder if there are people out there who are very interested in what I eat and where I eat it. The randomness of it is what gets to me. I didn't develop a routine there. I wasn't a regular. I just happened to stop in one Friday and somehow became part of something I still don't understand. And that's the thing about McDonald's. You think you're just going in for a quick meal. Yes, you don't expect to become entangled in someone else's plan, but sometimes you do, and sometimes you never find out why. I manage a small office building downtown, and part of my job is coordinating catering for meetings. About 3 months ago, we had a big client presentation, and I ordered lunch from McDonald's for about 20 people. I called ahead and specified the exact order, the delivery time, everything. The manager assured me it would be ready by noon. At noon, the delivery arrived. One of my assistants signed for it and brought it to the conference room. Everything seemed fine until we started unpacking the bags. There were extra items in there, not just a few extra fries or something. There were dozens of items that we hadn't ordered. Happy Meal toys, extra sauce packets, items that made no sense for our order. More concerning, there was a note in one of the bags. It was handwritten on a napkin, and it said, "Your meeting won't end well." I immediately called the McDonald's and spoke to a manager. I asked if this was some kind of sick prank. He apologized profusely and said he didn't know how that happened. He offered to refund the order and send out a replacement. I accepted the refund, but I didn't want a replacement. The whole thing felt wrong. I asked to speak to whoever had prepared the order, and he said the employee who made it wasn't working that day, and he didn't have personal information to share. My client meeting happened anyway. It went fine. We closed the deal, but I couldn't get the note out of my head. Your meeting won't end well. It did end well, thankfully, but the fact that someone had predicted otherwise, someone at the McDonald's who knew exactly when my meeting was scheduled, made my skin crawl. I tried to move on and not think about it, but a week later I got a call at my office from a man I'd never spoken to before. He knew my name. He knew which McDonald's I'd ordered from. He said, "Well, the note was a warning. You should have listened." I asked him who he was, and he said, "Someone who knows about your deliveries." Then he hung up. I started ordering from different restaurants. I avoided that McDonald's entirely. But strange things kept happening. I'd get emails from unknown addresses saying things like, "We know where you order from. We know your lunch schedule. We know your office location." Some emails had photos attached. Photos of my office building taken from the street. Photos of me walking to my car. With photos of the window of my office. I reported everything to the police, and they took it seriously this time. They investigated the email addresses, but they were all anonymized accounts. They increased patrols around my office building. But the emails kept coming, and they kept showing knowledge about my schedule, my habits, my location. The worst part came 2 months in. I got an email that just said, "Next time order from the McDonald's on 5th Street. We'll be waiting." I didn't order from any McDonald's after that. I brought my lunch from home, but I was terrified that I'd somehow offended whoever was doing this by not complying with their request. It's been about 6 weeks since the last email, and the calls have stopped. But I've changed my entire routine. I don't go out for lunch anymore. I don't use the same catering service twice. I vary my schedule constantly. I've become hyper-aware of people watching me, of being followed, of my office location being surveilled. What frightens me most is that it all started with a simple lunch order that I didn't even personally pick up. Someone at a McDonald's decided that my meeting mattered to them. Someone decided that my schedule was worth noting. Someone decided that I should know I was being watched. And because I ordered food from the wrong place at the wrong time, my entire sense of security has been dismantled. If you're ordering catering or delivery from McDonald's, be aware that you're giving them information about your location and your schedule. Be aware that someone working there might be paying attention. Or be aware that a simple order can become the entry point for someone to insert themselves into your life. And whatever you do, if you get a warning in your food, take it seriously. Don't dismiss it as a prank. Because I did, and I've spent the last 3 months wondering what I should have done. I started working at McDonald's about 6 months ago. It was supposed to be a temporary job, just something to pay rent while I figured out what I wanted to do with my life. I worked the evening shift, 4 p.m. to close, which was usually around 10 or 11 p.m. The job was fine, repetitive but fine. My co-workers were mostly other teenagers and college students, people just trying to make money. Then one night, everything changed. I was working the register around 9 p.m. when a man came through the drive-thru. He ordered a single McDouble and a water. Nothing unusual about that. But when he got to the window, he looked directly at me and said, "You're going to transfer to the morning shift." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. I laughed nervously and said I liked the evening shift. He said, "No, you're going to change to mornings, starting Monday." Then he drove away. I mentioned it to my manager, and he said the guy was probably just joking around, trying to mess with me. But something about the way he'd said it, the certainty in his voice, made me feel like it wasn't a joke. I decided I didn't want to transfer my shift. I liked the schedule I had. I wasn't going to let some random customer dictate my work life. But over the next week, that man came back every single day. Same order, same window, same message delivered in slightly different ways. "You're switching to mornings. Morning shift is better for you. We need you on the morning shift." Each time he came, he seemed more serious, more insistent. Other customers started noticing too. One older woman asked if I knew him. I said no. She told me I should do what he asked because she'd never seen someone look at another person the way he was looking at me. I told my manager again, and this time he seemed to take it more seriously. He said he'd watch the cameras and keep an eye on the situation, but he didn't seem particularly concerned. I got the feeling he thought I was overreacting. On Friday, the man came in, and this time he handed me a note along with his payment. The note said, "You have until Monday." That was all, just that one sentence. I didn't sleep that entire weekend. I was terrified to go to work on Monday. I seriously considered calling in sick, quitting, just not showing up. But I needed the job. I needed the money. So I went in on Monday and worked my regular evening shift. The man didn't come that day, or the next day. By Wednesday, I thought maybe he'd moved on, maybe he'd found someone else to harass or whatever this was. Then I got a text from an unknown number. It just said, You made the wrong choice. Over the next week, I got multiple texts from different numbers, all of them saying variations of the same thing. You should have switched. Now we have to do this the hard way. You had your chance. Change your shift or something will change for you. I showed the text to my manager and he finally called corporate. They got the police involved. The police traced the numbers to burner phones and couldn't identify who was sending them. They recommended I transfer locations or quit. But I'd already invested 6 months in this job. I'd made friends with my coworkers. I didn't want to just give up because of some stalker. That's when things got worse. I came to work one day and my locker had been broken into. Nothing was stolen, but there was a note inside. It said, "Last chance." The police increased patrols around the location. McDonald's corporate actually took it seriously and reviewed all the security footage. They identified the man from the drive-thru. They said he'd been a former employee who was fired for inappropriate behavior. When they confronted him, he was arrested for stalking and harassment. But here's what messes me up. Even though he's been arrested, I still feel like I made the wrong choice by not transferring my shift. I still wonder if he's still out there somehow, if there are other people like him who are watching me. I transferred to a different McDonald's location anyway, just to feel safer. But I'm always looking over my shoulder. I'm always wondering if someone else is going to come through a drive-thru window with a demand for me to do something I don't want to do. What I learned from this is that there are people out there who feel entitled to control other people's decisions, who feel like they can dictate someone's schedule or life choices. And sometimes they'll stalk you. Sometimes they'll threaten you. Sometimes they'll force you into a corner where your only choice is to comply or live in fear. I did comply eventually by leaving that job. And I still don't know if that was the right decision or if I just taught whoever it was that they could manipulate me into doing what they wanted. If you work in fast food or any service industry, be aware that you're vulnerable. You're visible. You're a person with a face and a schedule that people can notice. Be careful about customers who seem too interested in you. Be careful about requests that feel like demands. And please report anything unusual to your manager and to the police. Don't dismiss it like I almost did. Because once someone decides you're worth their attention, once they decide your schedule matters to them, you're already in their control. These are McDonald's horror stories. Stories of people whose lives were disrupted by visits to a place that was supposed to be safe, routine, ordinary. If you have a McDonald's story of your own, if you've experienced something unusual, just remember that you're not alone. And remember that sometimes the most terrifying things happen in the most mundane places, when you least expect them, and in ways you'll never fully understand.